All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are coming to you live from American Top Team here in Watertown with episode number 46 of Cage Side Convos. I am Rick Huntsman.
And this is Quince.
And did the intro backwards. Been a while since we've been here. We've been rocking over last couple episodes we did from Tunes.
Yeah.
Which kind of taken on as a local sponsor, Tunes 92.5, whatever their other call sign is. I always forget the other part, but
yeah.
That's your job.
1045.
1045.
But yeah, most people listen to Tunes. Yeah, no, it's nice to have different venues because we got to adapt and change to the schedules and just the nature of life. But to have multiple venues that not only support what it is we talk about and the reason why we do it, but to also provide a space to continue to do that, which makes it super easy for us.
Absolutely.
So big shout out to Top Team, and big shout out to Tunes 92.5 as well.
Yeah, and so it's funny. Today we're going to be talking about language, and initially, try to script out at least a little bit at the beginning of it so we can start off with a little bit of a flow.
Right.
But adapt and change were two words that you chose to use as far as talking about the venues that we come from, whether we're recording before we put the session, whether we're going live like we are today and stuff. But it's funny because we were talking a little bit before the show about the language that we choose, or like the areas of focus that we have, or the areas of private study that we have, and how that affects our language. So adapting and changing, that's something that over the past year and a half that we've been doing Cage Side Combos, those are words that have become so ingrained in my personal vocabulary. And I think a lot of it is because of what you and I have started focusing on talking about here. So it's pretty interesting to see or to recognize that my vocabulary has shifted even just through focused conversations, focused study.
I looking back, and I guess just as even prior to moving towards being a musician or an artist, which language has so much to do with art itself and the way we use language and words and things like that, I would run through the dictionary, because I was like, the more words I have at my disposal, the better I can express myself. And there's certainly truth to that. To have those words sitting in the back of your mind, but you as you actually go through life and go through experience, you realize it's not only the amount of words that you have, but it's the how you use them. I can use 500 words to express my day from yesterday, or I can use 150 words to better describe the expression, the feeling that I might have gone through while, moving through the day. And so really there's no real wrong or right way as far as word use, but it's to understand that the words are multifaceted in what you use and how you use it, and from the core in which it comes from. So it is very interesting to think of the words that stick around, like adapt and change. And we always talk about vulnerability. We talk about progression and process, and these are things that we've recognized going through the experience. I didn't go out searching for these words. It's almost like the words found me once I was very much involved in the life that I was working for. And then these words start popping up, like discipline. You know what I mean? A flow state. All this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think it was I believe it was Ernest Hemingway that basically adapted his whole writing style around being able to express a complex idea simply, right? So you don't have to have a huge vocabulary. You don't have to send your readers to the dictionary every other line. You know what I mean? But if you can take the simple words that are poignant, if you can choose the right words to express your thoughts, you can use words like adapt and change and flow and stuff like that. And those words are going to mean so much different. There, so many different things to so many people. You know what I mean? If I say flow state to you, you have an idea and a feeling and understanding of what flow means. I have a different understanding of what flow means, maybe. But then we start talking about that, and all of a sudden now we're even more intimately connected. We understand each other differently, and then all of a sudden we've taken a very simple 4-letter word that we've all heard since we were very, very young, and we've expanded it into this very complex idea that you almost can't even explain.
Right.
You know, explain flow state in 2 words, you're like, I can't, but I can feel it. You know what I mean? And then when somebody chooses that in their vocabulary and you're having that discussion, all of a sudden it clicks on. You know what I mean? You could be, maybe we're eavesdropping on a conversation and someone's like, yeah, man, I was flowing doing this the other day, and all of a sudden what are you guys talking about?
Yeah.
What are you talking about over here?
Right,
You know what I mean?
right.
I want to be involved in that conversation.
Because they're almost not real. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But they're
I swear to God, we're not on
untangible.
mushrooms right now.
But
Words aren't even real, man.
they're untangible
Yeah.
representations
Yeah.
of experience or feelings or ideas, I suppose.
Sure.
And just that fact alone, because you could say flow or flow state, and that when you say it, you're representing your feeling of
Yeah.
flow state,
Yeah.
what you remember while you were in that flow state.
Yeah.
And like you said, people might hear that word, flow, and then they think how they represent flow.
Yeah.
You know,
Sure.
which is awesome, because this is what, like you said, starts to help us get connected. But there are so many layers underneath.
Yeah.
You know, with understanding our individual language. It's wild to think that there are over 6,000 languages, and you know, we have all these words, and they're used for the same reason, but they're also separating us at the same time.
Sure. Sure.
And to think that language is so important, or the need for language, even before language was what it is now, there was a need for it.
Right.
And there's a need for it all over the world, you know, with just humanity in general, that they're coming up with their own language and use of language. At the same time, maybe, you know, right around the same time. So the need is there.
Sure.
You know, and even before, so it was interesting, the dude that was talking about there being over 6,000 types of language, he's like, I believe that language in part stems from the fact that we are bipedal. So that now we, if we're talking about evolution, you know, came from 4 legs, possibly to 2 legs. And before, vocal language was more of a miming, like gesticulation with the hands.
Sure.
You know, what we need, what we're afraid of, you know, where danger is. And so it almost started with that, and it went from symbolic to more analytical with
Sure.
the vocal tones.
Sure.
So it's interesting to think that how much that language or the need for language in the different shapes and forms have allowed us to survive.
Sure.
And evolve. And so now we're almost evolving around, is the language, you know, are we evolving the language, or is the language evolving us?
Right. Right.
You know?
Yeah, that's interesting, man. So thinking about, you know, what's the purpose of language, and the purpose of language ultimately is communicate an idea, right? So, you know, you're talking to people and they're like, you know, I don't know if I'm using this word the right way, or I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, but as long as, you know, if I understand what you're saying, then it's the right way to say it. You know what I mean? That ultimately that's the end goal, right?
Right.
So looking at it evolutionarily speaking, when you meet somebody that speaks a different language, that speaks an evolved language, right? So like you said, language has evolved as our brains have evolved, and we've adapted to become smarter, right? So everybody started speaking different languages. So when you meet somebody that speaks Spanish or Chinese or one of the other, you know, 5,998 languages that are out there,
Sure.
if you can't verbally communicate, what do? We immediately start using hand signals. We start gesticulating, right? So we go back to more of a primordial, you know, pre-evolution mindset. You know, we tap into our reptilian brains, our less evolved brain, right?
Yeah.
But we go with the most basic thing that we know.
Right.
It's just like when we're in a dangerous situation, fear takes over. When we're cold, our body reacts a certain way. When we don't know what else to do, we go back to, you know, evolutionary speaking, what we knew worked back then. And we can communicate with anybody through hand signals, like you said, danger is this way, or this is like, I want food.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or come here, or go away. You know, very simple things to communicate very basic ideas that we know by default people are going to understand.
Yeah.
You know?
And, you know, when I think about the use of it, I was talking with my girl last night, and I was like, well, what do you think is the why do we have language? Why do we? And she gave this big, elaborate, beautifully flowery, answer to it. And she wasn't wrong. It was all about, connecting with other people and connecting with ourselves,
Sure.
and all this stuff that is true. And I went to bed later, and I woke up this morning, and I was like, oh, for survival.
Sure.
Language is for survival,
Yeah,
and I think that's the,
sure.
because I wanted to encompass all of it. Sure. And so we had all these techniques for survival. And when you talk about, we're going back, pre-evolutionary times with the gesticulations and stuff like that, like before we had that, think about you come up to an animal or even a person and you catch that snarl, or you know what I mean? You show the teeth.
Yeah.
Look, I don't care what language you speak. You're gonna be like, oh yeah, no, that means don't fuck with me.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
So I'm not gonna mess around anymore.
Sure.
But we go back a little bit, and we realize all those what was the term?
Primordial.
Is it primordial?
That we all stem from the primordial ooze.
The primordial ooze.
Sure.
We were saying pre-evolutionary.
Yeah.
But primordial.
And see, that's the thing. Maybe that's not the best word to use, but I say that everybody knows exactly what we're talking about.
but these are the things we're connected in this way because that primordial nature is universal.
Sure.
So that's why we all know with the starling teeth.
Yeah.
Even with the hand up.
Yeah.
So that connects us, and so now we stem from that to use the language that we use, whether it's English or Chinese or the other 5,000, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's almost like we now have to come back around to it,
Right.
So we came from the same spot, separated, but eventually, we are looking to connect again.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think too, we were talking about specific languages, English, Spanish, etc. I'm using those two because those are the only two languages I actually have any working knowledge of. So, but I think our language becomes identity a little bit too.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And I think when you endeavor to speak somebody's language, right? I think that endears them to you a little bit. You know what I mean? I know when I talk to somebody who's not a native English speaker and they're doing their best to try to speak English, I empathize with them. I feel for them because that's, in a way, that's showing me a lot of respect because they're trying to talk in a language that I understand, and I appreciate that quite a bit. You know what I mean? So when I went to Costa Rica a few years ago, the lady that was taking care of our room for us in the hotel over there, obviously she's a native Spanish speaker, and that's all she spoke. And my couple years of Spanish in high school, I could effectively basically communicate the idea I was trying to get across to her, and she was very kind to me, and she slowed down what she was saying so I could understand her, or if I wasn't understanding, she was picking different words, and eventually she figured out what I knew, and I could speak in such a way that we could communicate. And that was a really, really cool experience because, here I am, I'm a guest in this person's country, and I don't know really much Spanish. I know enough to cob it together and have a conversation, but it was really cool to see the look on her face and the way that she smiled back at me when I attempted, to speak her language a little bit, and it's a really cool way to connect to people too, and just trying to figure out, and even if you don't know their language at all, but trying to figure out a way to gesticulate or emote or posture your body in an effective way to communicate, I think really changes the way you can link up to a person. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, because there's so much power within language. In the U.S., the dominant language is English.
Sure.
So there's a lot of power in it.
Sure.
If you want to, maneuver or find success in the U.S., your best bet is to also learn. You got your native language, but to also learn English.
Yeah.
That's not to say that English is the majority language. That's not to say that that's all you need to know, because in a growing world, in a growing country where people are coming from other countries, to be able to adapt also and learn a little bit of other languages is beneficial.
Yeah.
But with it being so powerful, it was interesting because I was like, well, language is for communication. And we grow up in like a family unit.
Sure.
And the family household speaks a certain way. Even if everybody's talking English, right? Speaking English, but the family unit speaks to each other in a certain way.
Yeah.
And that's where we learn it. And then we go outside into our community. And all those family units that speak a certain way now have to interact with community members. And so we also speak as a community in a separate way. And this grows to state,
Yeah.
and it grows to country. We're in Watertown, New York. We're 30 miles north is Canada, where they speak a different language.
Yeah.
You know, they're talking, you know, French Canadian or Dutch maybe in some places.
Sure.
And it's 30 miles away.
Sure.
You go 30 miles south, and it's, you know, Syracuse.
Yeah.
Or whatever. But I was thinking about it, and as much as we use language to communicate, we also use it to fortify and protect.
Yeah.
So you think about why there also might be different languages, or why when I hop into the chair at the barbershop and they're all speaking Spanish to each other.
Yeah.
You know, probably
Yeah.
so they could say how goofy I look with
Sure.
you know, this dude hasn't come in for 4 weeks without a haircut.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's probably a bad example. But the fact is that sometimes people might switch up to just talk to each other.
Sure.
They're people they recognize as their own.
Sure.
And so in that way, it's for protection.
Yeah.
Communication and protection at the same time.
Yep. And you know, I mean, kind of back to the point of identity too. You know what I mean? Especially if you're, you know, so say you're a native Spanish speaker and you come here and you're just starting to learn the language and stuff. And I see this happen in the gym because we have such an eclectic group of people here. We have a couple of students who are native Spanish speakers, and they'll be, you know, talking, and some of the students, you know, like I was having this conversation with one student, he's like, you know, it takes me a minute to translate it to understand what you're saying to me, especially when I'm speaking a very unique language. Like if I'm speaking the language for like the Bang Muay Thai system that I coach on, you know, okay, we're gonna go 2 hands roll across a glow. You know, I don't know what that means. One, I don't understand those English words. I don't know how to translate them in my head, and I don't know how to apply it. You know, so we have to slow down, and so there's that language barrier. But another native Spanish speaker comes in, and all of a sudden those two are teaming up and they're talking together and they're figuring it out, and then the one guy can translate more directly for the other student what I'm saying and stuff like that. So you see this connection, and that you feel more at home when you can literally speak the language that you're used to and that you've grown up with. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And it just kind of reinforces the need to be patient, to take your time. And for me, one of the coolest things is figuring out how to speak a language that somebody understands. You know, sometimes it's going to be a more slow-paced conversation, and like I said, I can say hello in Spanish and give like left and right directions and very, very, very simple things. You know, and if somebody's willing to take the time with me, I can understand what they're saying in Spanish. But to get through that language barrier, it's going to take a little bit of time. You know. But if you endeavor to do that again, like you can form a special connection with somebody if you at least make the effort to try to help them understand what you're trying to say.
Exactly.
You know?
And just what you were saying, if you're willing to take the time.
Yeah.
And when you are able to speak with someone in their native language, it shows that. It shows that I am not here to oppress with my language, to demand of you my language and understanding. I have taken the time to learn your language because I want to, you know, hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
You know, in that way. So I think that's that good faith.
Yeah.
You know, effort, and that's why people are. I think that's where that special connection comes from.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
And I don't know. And you're right. There are different ways. Well, I was going to go off on a tangent, but I don't want to go too far from, because you were.
Fuck it, man. Send it. We'll loop it back around, right?
Yeah. Well, and again, I think, you know, bridging that gap, because they talk about, what is it, the Tower of Babel, right?
Yeah.
That, you know, all these languages are trying to reach up and connect and create this heaven on earth.
Yeah.
but the fact that we all speaking different languages end up, we end up fighting,
Right.
in wars.
What was the story of the Tower of Babel? Right? Wasn't that they were trying to build the tower to heaven, and then God got mad and smashed it, and then made it so that everybody spoke a different language? Isn't that what it was?
Yeah.
Something like that. I don't know. We're gonna have to do some reading. we're gonna have one listener and be like, "You stupid fucks." You guys, all the language you know, and you choose the wrong way to explain that story.
Right. But we got there though.
I don't know. I once my mom watches this, I'm sure she'll give me a call and be like, "I'm not mad, but I'm disappointed."
Right. Google says.
Yeah.
But you were talking about before, working with people that are in here to train.
Yeah.
Some of the students, and there's a certain lingo that you guys use here as like a martial art instructor, so to know that is one step. There's a learning curve to know just the traditional lingo used here, but then there's a learning curve for you because you have to understand this individual's knowledge.
Yeah.
You have to understand how they hear you, interpret what you're saying, and maybe how it is best they learn.
Yeah. So something really interesting, something that's helped me a lot with coaching, with communicating with students, when I'll ask a student a question and I'll say, well, what is your answer to this question? And they'll stop, and I see it all the time. Is students will try to think of what I want them to say, and I'll tell them, like, listen, don't try to tell me the answer you think I want to hear. You have to tell me your perception of the situation. You answer the question as truthfully as you can for yourself, so I can see where you're at, because I need to understand where they're coming from and what they know, because I need to know how they're perceiving my language, because I need to know, okay, well, if I'm trying to elicit this kind of reaction, if I'm trying to get you to move your body in a specific way and you're not understanding what I'm saying, I need to know that so I can make the adjustment, because ultimately my goal is for them to be better, and for them to understand what I'm trying to say, and what, however I have to speak to them to elicit that reaction is the right way.
Sure.
You know what I mean? You and I have trained together a lot one-on-one, and so now when I tell you something, I can show you something 2 or 3 times, and I know the verbal cues that are going to elicit a specific reaction from you. But when I take a new student or a different student, you know what I mean? That might not work.
Right.
So just like even thinking of how to get somebody to throw a hook. You know what I mean? There's some students that I'm going to, use the cue, okay, drive through your hips, settle your weight on your foot, let's throw this palm down, let's throw a palm in, you know what I mean? Like, don't pull your head away, fight in the phone booth, you know what I mean? Just different cues that I'm going to give different students. And I think those are all cues I've used with success across, 20 different students. And depending on what thing clicks that's the right cue.
Yeah.
Again, it doesn't matter how you visualize or how you conceptualize something. If it elicits the most efficient reaction, or if it's going to keep you safe in a fight, if it's going to let you hit and not be hit, then that's the right way to think about it.
Right.
That's the right language to use.
Yeah.
And then through having that connection, I know, especially when I have somebody go into the cage when somebody's fighting, they're going to have a lot more confidence in what I'm telling them if they know the other person can't understand me.
Right.
Because
as a student, to listen and to learn to how you speak is going to make one a better student. Yeah. But it doesn't necessarily make you a better teacher.
Right.
So language, like communication, is always that two-way street. Yes. The listening as well as the speaking. So for you to be meeting the student halfway when they're trying to understand your language and you doing the same exact thing. Both people are going to be individually, you're going to be better for it, and then as a paired, the teaching and learning whole, you guys are going to be better for it.
Absolutely. Because they need to know the basic vocabulary, but how I'm putting it together is on me. Yes. You know what I mean? It's not a student's responsibility to learn the way that I instruct. It's my responsibility to instruct in a way that every student can learn. Yeah. And so it's going to click with some students better. Obviously, some people are going to take more one-on-one adjustment, especially in a class setting. If you have 10, 15, 20 students, hopefully once COVID's over, 30 students in a class, you know what I mean? But whoever's here, when you're speaking to a broad range of people, a lot of times you have to speak very simply, because everybody's going to take the cueing and stuff differently, and I need to figure out, okay, what's working for the group as a whole, and then understanding, okay, individually, this is where certain people are having problems, and then adjusting my vocabulary based on, kind of like you were talking about, you know, you start at the household, the community, the region, the state, you know what I mean? I've got to speak widely appealing, and then as I get into smaller groups, if I have a group of 2, I can speak to in a much different way.
Yeah.
Whereas a group of 10, group of 20, you have to speak differently.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, because it's well known that that there are different learning styles. People have different learning styles. I don't know what that's called necessarily, the study of it, but you know, learning.
It's been largely debunked, actually, from what I was reading.
Learning styles.
Yeah. I learned that.
Well, I was, just a quick breakdown, just as far as analytical learning through reading, opposed to hands-on learning, learning through doing
stuff like that.
Yeah. But what do you mean debunked in what way?
So, and again, I didn't dive too much into the actual research on it and stuff, but it was curious. I was listening to a podcast on effective learning, and then basically how to make knowledge stick. And they were saying that, some people say, well, I learned better verbally, or I learned better kinetically, or I learned better, through reading and stuff like that. It might be your preferred way to learn. And I would have to really look into how they structured the studies and stuff like that. But essentially they were saying that no matter what your preferred way to learn is, that everybody can learn through every means just as effectively. If you take someone who's a kinetic learner, and if you put them in an appropriately structured verbal environment, they can learn just as effective as somebody who's a verbal learner. But again, that's me saying, yeah, I read a study on it, is just exactly the same as you saying, I read a study on it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So basically, if you prefer to learn a certain way, but again, I mean, that comes right back down to language. Because if you feel like you're a kinetic learner, if you feel like physically moving and going through the motions is your learning style, then that's your learning style. But there's some things like martial arts is a kinetic skill. It's a movement-based skill, so you have to do it in a movement-based environment. You can sit around and talk theory about it all day, but if you don't actually do it, if you don't have the background in the movement, you're never going to understand it. You get into like quantum physics and stuff like that, a lot of that stuff you have to read, you have to conceptualize, because you can't physically put your hands on a lot of the stuff, you know what I mean?
Right.
Well, this is how quasars interact. You can't feel that, you can't touch that, and you have to just understand it, you know what I mean? So if you're a kinetic learner, you can still learn and understand that. It might take you a little bit longer, it might take you a little bit longer to understand the language, conceptualize it, and interpret it in a productive way, but you can still learn those things that are outside of your preferred realm of learning.
Yeah. I think,
And how's that for a
bullet
fucking
pointed
tangent for you?
the bullet pointed learning styles, I do agree that you can learn from each one.
Yeah,
it's not
absolutely.
like, a red light, green light, black or white issue. But I think it was more so the fact that, we might be more inept in certain ways than others.
Absolutely. And to that, like I said, there's no reason for me to get off on that tangent. It was more just
you were so excited though.
to
I had
stick
to
a
hear
thorn
it.
in your side. Yeah, it's you know me, I get excited about every fucking thing we talk about. So, but yeah, absolutely. So, kind of leaving it in the realm of language, right? So how you prefer to learn, or how you feel like you learn best. That's the easiest way to speak to people.
Yeah. And it's interesting because as we were talking a little bit about this before, the language habits and patterns that we pick up through the experience of doing, because it's not just, we're not out here just, just visualizing it.
Yep.
Although that is important, we're not just visualizing, we're actually putting it into practical use, putting it into motion. So through that motion, through that experience, those certain words stand out. And you notice, or I've noticed, that the people around us seem, for some reason they seem to start speaking like we do. Now, is that just by chance, or is that through the process of the fact that we start spending our time more so with the people that talk like us, the people that talk about, trusting in the process, the people that say have that day one mindset, use that sort of language, adapting and changing and vulnerability. and emotional strength, or you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's no coincidence that the people around us start changing and kind of responding to our language or
Yeah.
repeating the same sort of language.
Absolutely, yeah. So the notion of you're a product of the 5 people you spend the most time with. When you start changing the way that you speak, the people that don't speak that language they're either going to change and adapt, or they're going to go away. You know what I mean? And so whether the people around you are changing internally, or the actual people around you are different people. You know what I mean? Once you start speaking a certain way, you're going to gravitate towards those people that speak that way. And that, again, I mean, if you're an English speaker and you go to somewhere that their native language is not English, you're going to find the other English speakers in that area.
Right.
You know what I mean? And you're going to make sure the 5 people around you speak a language that you understand, or you're going to learn the language.
Right.
If I go to Spain, I'm either going to find the English speakers, or I'm going to hang out with 5 people who speak Spanish, and eventually I'll speak Spanish.
Yeah, and being an artist, you want to reach as many people as possible, but to just jump into that notion and just speak in a way or create music in a way that tries to entertain everybody or captivate everybody, you kind of get lost in the language.
Sure.
It no longer even becomes your own language. You're just a reflection of this prism, this split. You're split into all of these different ways, and you kind of lose yourself within it.
Sure.
So we were talking earlier about the fact that we have to trust in our own use of language and create that foundation in which we build on. And the first people, it's not going to hit everyone's ear the same, but the first people whose ears do perk up, who do tune in, become your audience.
Yeah.
And those are the people who, not that you're making music for necessarily, because or art or whatever you're doing, because essentially you first need to be doing it for self.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
absolutely.
Doing it for self, and people, like you said, will gravitate into the way in which we speak.
Yeah.
And usually those people tend to speak in a similar fashion, which is why it perked up to them.
Yeah.
So getting your ground base, getting your audience, and then expanding from there, because through all that experience, you're also, connecting with people who, nobody's going to tell. We have a lot in common in the way that we speak or approach things, but we also have many differences that I am introduced to, right?
Sure.
We speak in a certain way, so we connect, but we also have plenty differences in which now I can be like, oh, I don't agree with this, or I'm not familiar with this, but I'm familiar with the ways in which we do speak, so I can trust that, or I have more patience to understand.
Sure.
Oh, that was the back. Understand, this aspect of the world that I don't know.
Right.
So anyway, in broadening that experience, I think we continue, or I hope that we continue to add on to that language and expand, but from a more natural or organic way.
Yeah. Something you said in there that caught my attention was trust. Right? You said that through our commonalities, that builds trust. When I bring something that you don't understand or initially agree with or whatever to the table, like, it's very easy, because we've spent a lot of time getting to learn each other's language, and a lot of what got us hanging out and talking in the first place was the fact that we spoke the same language.
Right.
We talk about that day, like one of the first days that my brother and you and CK and we sat down at Maggie's just upstairs for a couple of hours, and we just talked. You know what I mean? And that was we were all speaking the same language right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And just coming from various different backgrounds and stuff, but through that continued exploration of shared language and shared ideas and commonalities, we've built an understanding of each other. So when I say something to you, especially if it's contradictory to something that you said, you know me well enough to trust in the fact that I'm not attacking you, or I'm not downplaying your intelligence. I don't think you're stupid, or I'm not telling you you're wrong. You know me well enough that I'm speaking from my place of experience,
Right.
and you automatically translate that in your mind.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas somebody I don't know as well, from what I've been told, I have a tendency to be people perceive me as being aggressive, which I think I'm just excitable, but you know, that's how they interpret my language and my posturing and my tone of voice and stuff like that. And people that know me better, even if they think I'm being aggressive, they understand that, you know, okay, well, this is what he's saying. Maybe this is where he's coming from with this, or maybe he's just excited and he needs to calm the fuck down a little bit, you know, stuff like that. But I think that sharing a language and sharing so many, because through shared language you develop commonalities, you share an identity to a certain extent, you know, and you become like that smaller little family group, you know what I mean? The more unique language you share with somebody, the closer I think you are.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so that opens the door for challenging discussions, for dissenting opinions, for disagreements, for you know, with other people that didn't speak your language would seem like a fight or an aggressive act, you know what I mean? So when you say something that I don't understand, I'm like, okay, tell me more about that.
Right.
Like, that's a part of your language I don't understand. I know through constant practice that eventually I'll be able to understand what you're saying, you know, and it'll enlighten me a little bit.
Sure. And how important is that? You know, just to have
critical.
that gateway vocabulary.
Yeah.
You know, gateway language and understandings that allow us to expand in the ways that are necessary.
Yeah.
You know, for everything that we go through, and we each individually, you know, we each go through it as individuals, and then as a whole, like the macrocosm, we're all going through it. You know, and this is all happening at the same time. And although it feels like we're individually going through it, and it's almost, you know, and it can be kind of lonely or whatever word you want to put in there, the better that we can connect with others that can share their experience in ways that we can interpret, the stronger that bond is. And the more people that we can feel like we are going through it with, I think lessens the burden greatly.
Absolutely.
Lessens the burden greatly. And this is one of the beautiful things about communication and proper communication.
Yeah.
But it does. It has so much to do with trust, because it changes a joke from an insult. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It changes something learned from something learned and received to something pushed back on.
Sure.
You know, and putting those defensive walls up. And you know, this is even more important with the people closest to us.
Yeah.
You know, to learn how each other speak, learn how each other listen, and it's a constant process. It's a constant thing in work, and it's hard, almost impossible to do with other people. Like, it'd be impossible for us to meet at a certain point and speak and understand each other at a certain point if we were not speaking with ourselves first. You know what I mean? Trying to communicate things to ourselves first, because that's in fact what we put out in the world. Our understanding of things, or a lack of understanding of things, is what we're putting out in the world. And when that, you know, connects with other people, people respond accordingly.
Absolutely.
And
I think that that internal language it's so important, man. And exactly like you're saying, so understanding that, especially when it comes to insults or our knee-jerk reaction to be defensive or to let our ego intercede and stuff like that, it comes from, I have to have the conversation inside, and I have to believe and I have to speak the language internally that what other people say and try to do to me is a reflection of their inner self, and it's not a reflection of me. You know what I mean? I come from in here out.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I don't come from out here in.
Right.
It doesn't matter what people say or how people act towards me. And that, you know, goes back to the kind of stoic notion, you know what I mean, of nothing external can harm me, right? Only harm or good can come from inside. It comes from inside out, right? But I have to speak that language internally. I have to project that externally.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's my, you know, speaking from my heart. And, you know, some people say that's speaking your truth, you know what I mean? And, but once you start to truly believe, and that's the internal process that you have, is when somebody says something negative, internally you translate it as that's them projecting off, you know, themselves.
Sure.
You know, that's they're fighting something inside of them that's causing them to react that way to me. Now, you know, if somebody tells me I'm being an asshole, I still have to take that in, process it inside, and say, okay, well, was what I do, you know, and what I do, is what I am doing,
There it is.
is this negative? Am I actually trying to inflict harm on this person? Is this really coming from a mean or an egotistical place?
Right.
Or am I being genuine? Is this the truth? And do they just not want to hear it?
Right.
Because depending on how that translates inside, it depends on how I need to adjust my actions.
Yeah.
You know, if you're telling me I'm an asshole because I told you what you're doing is wrong, and you know what you're doing is wrong, I'm not the asshole.
Right.
You're just trying to reflect that on me because you're not having the internal dialogue that's going to be productive.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm just mouthing off to be a dick, then don't worry about what I'm saying. Either I'm doing it to be funny or
Right.
I need to readjust how I'm thinking. You
Right.
know what I mean?
Exactly.
But it all comes down to that internal dialogue.
Yeah. I'm reading this one book. It's like stuff they won't teach you at the Yale School of Business or something like that. And
Sure.
this business owner, a CEO, and he's like, it's so important when you're linking with other, say, people that want to jump into partnership with you when it comes to businesses. It's important to have these interactions out in the world, casual settings, so you can kind of get a glimpse of who they are, who their personality is, because they're going to show you one face.
Yeah.
Their language is going to be in a way that caters to you. The smile is going to cater to you. And he's like, that thing about how people speak to the owner of a business, of a restaurant, compared to how they speak to the waiter, or compared to how they speak to the managerial staff or maintenance staff. That's important, and it tells a lot about them. And he was saying it's so important. Say if someone has a short fuse and it comes out, and that's how they lash out at someone, they're like, pay attention to that because that's how they speak to themselves.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah,
and
sure.
and you know, and I understood the whole, you know, speak to the maintenance guy like you would the principal.
Sure.
You know, I get that. I understand that completely. But I've never thought about the fact that, you know, someone's temper and how they might lash out is exactly how they speak to themselves. Sure. And eventually that's what it's going to be. Unless they can correct that themselves. You know what I mean?
That speaks to me in a pretty real way too, because I've definitely, I would like to think that it's, you know, getting more under control as I endeavor to study and understand myself better, but had problems with my tempers for a long time, like very specifically late teenage years, early 20s and stuff like that. Man, I was a fucking short fuse. You know, it didn't take much to set me off, and then, you know, as I realized that, you know, okay, it's okay for me to interpret the world in certain ways, and that anger is an acceptable emotion and it's a natural emotion and stuff, but the way I respond to it is my choosing. And I've started having the internal dialogue when I feel myself getting angry, trying to say, okay, why are you feeling this way? Okay, even if I don't understand why I'm feeling that way, how do you want to react? How do you want to be perceived, or how, you know, what do you feel is the morally right way to respond in this situation? You know, is it the best thing to do to honk or yell at that guy in the road that cut you off or flip him off? Or is it better for me internally to have the dialogue saying, okay, I don't need to do this. I understand that whatever they did is what they did and I don't have to react to it. You know what I mean? And so changing that way, it changes how I react in a lot of situations. And then my internal dialogue or monologue or whatever is becoming much more healthy, much more understanding. I'm a lot more forgiving of myself. I'm a lot more inclined to be patient with myself. And that translates over into, you know, how I conduct myself on the mats when I'm training. If I don't understand a movement or if I don't do it well, I don't get upset. I just understand that, okay, I'm just not doing it well, and that's the reality. I'll keep working on it. You know,
For sure.
That physical, that external manifestation of anger was, I think exactly like you're saying, is very indicative of being internally critical and unforgiving, and, you know, anxious and angry and stuff, all that with myself.
Yeah, and you know, it's I don't know. As far as there's so much power in getting to a point in which you don't have to respond to something, or where you can be aware before the feeling is let out. You know, it's not like you can't shake the feeling necessarily, but you don't have to be a slave to it, and to look at that feeling rationally, or maybe stepping outside yourself, because it's so important to know that you're not responding just from that feeling alone. You know, you know, when you talk about how that makes you critical, and how now that, you know, you might that language might be used to criticize others.
Yeah.
Now, how do you separate whether it's that internal criticalness that you're putting on someone, or if it's a situation in which someone needs to be something they're doing should be, I wish there was a different way to say criticize, but because that's going to be the difference from a learning experience to a fight, a shitty one. I think of, and this is something I had to step back from not too long ago. My girl's like, man, you can be critical sometimes. Some of the things you say, and I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, damn, I'm thinking that I just want the best from the situation. The best from whatever she's doing. If I say, oh, if you do it this way, it could be done a little bit quicker. She hears me as saying, what you're doing is dumb. What you're doing isn't working. And this would go on. This had gone on for a little bit of time, in which it built up with her. Before I know anything's going on, it built up with her to the point where she's just like, why are you being critical? And I think about it, and I'm like, well, maybe I'm being critical. I thought I was doing something genuine in helping the situation, and then after I reevaluated what I was doing, and I was like, no, I know what I need to do. I need to learn why she hears that as being critical. And I'm like, how's your day going? And there was one situation in particular. I'm like, because I've said stuff like this to you before, and it was received differently. I'm like, how's your day going? She's like, oh, well, the day's been kind of rough, handling this and this at work, or whatever might come up. And I'm like, okay, all right, so let's start there. I'm like, do you think maybe you're receiving it differently because of how your day's been, and whether it's the anxieties? And she's like, yeah, that could be it. Sure. And I couldn't have got there first without going through my self-reflection to make sure I have that, that truth, at least for me, to my understanding, and then understanding how she's hearing it, because I want the best for the situation, and that was able to help rectify and not only rectify, but then strengthen that communication, because now in the future, before I do something that I think is going to help, I'm like, hey, how's your day going?
Yeah, man. I think that's really powerful to understand where it's coming from. I think we've talked about this a little bit before. I've had a similar situation where, and I think a lot of it is the coach in me, is I want to say, look, this is what's going to rectify the problem. This is what's going to fix it. These are steps you need to do to correct it. You know what I mean? And so like, Rachel will be saying that this is what's going on at work or whatever, and be like, okay, well, do this, and do this, and I start bombarding with critiques or corrections, whichever side of it you're on. Maybe, on her side it feels like a critique. On my side, I'm, offering correction or offering advice, and it would get overwhelming. It would cause, confrontation between her and I, and then finally it clicked with me, and I don't know if it was something she said or if I just realized, I don't need to try to fix everything. And so through conversation with her, it's gotten to the point where if I feel myself about to offer unsolicited advice, I'll say, do you just want to get this off your chest, or do you want advice, or are you seeking counsel here? You know what I mean? And sometimes it's just, I want to get it off my chest. And then I realize that in myself, I do that as well, because sometimes I'll be just bitching about something, just try to venting it or externalizing it so I can figure it out. And she'll be trying to give me advice, and I'll react negatively. I'll just shut her down, or I don't want to hear it. I'll be aggressive. And it clicked with me that the reason I do that is because sometimes I'm just talking to get it off my chest, and I'm not always seeking counsel and stuff. So not only did I get the opportunity to understand her better and speak her language better, but I also had a very profound internal realization as well. So I got to understand myself better through that process. And it's the same thing you're saying is, if we have that inclination to always want to help, maybe we need to figure out where they're coming from, what's the backstory, what is in the past that is manifested in this externalization, you know what I mean? And once we do that, all of a sudden it becomes easier to speak the language, and what happens to the connection? It becomes so much stronger.
And I don't know if that sounds like to you guys that every situation we have to go back and get in front of the fucking psychologist, you know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
Go to therapy.
Sure.
No, it doesn't. It almost becomes innate, as far as our responses, our reactions, and how we handle each other. It becomes innate. It's not. There's no. You can't pinpoint like, okay, now it's this. Now I'm changed in this way. But now there's just more space and room to change and grow around, whatever the situation or conversation is.
Yeah. And a lot of it too is that we become less reactionary.
Yeah.
And instead of saying, this calls for my attention right now, like for me, it's just a matter of, okay, this is existing.
Yeah.
And is it worth my response, or am I just a sounding board?
Right.
You know what I mean? And that it affects how I coach as well. Because I can see a student doing something or drilling a technique not exactly the way I showed it, but now I think, okay, is this damaging that person? Do I need to intercede? Is what I'm seeing developing bad habits that's going to plague them long term, or are they simply going through the process? Are they letting their body understand it? You know what I mean? So it's let me become a lot more observant as a coach, and then I feel like it's also maybe become a little more empathetic as a coach, and not only as a coach, but as a conversationalist, as a friend, as a partner, whatever, letting people learn their own language, letting people learn themselves, and then not feeling so compelled to control how they speak. Like, don't talk to me like that because of this and this. Like, it doesn't have anything to do with me, as long as it's not, from a coaching aspect, as long as it's not going to hurt their progression, as long as it's not going to hurt their partner, or from a friendship level, as long as what whoever I'm talking to, my friend, my partner, whatever, as long as what they're saying isn't going to hurt themselves or hurt somebody else, like I don't necessarily need to react. I can let them discover it on their own.
There's an instance in which we'll be talking about something and she'll start to explain it, she'll start to explain it. I'm like, I get it. And she'll continue on. I'm like, I get it. And I'm like, my patience is short. I'm like, nah, let's keep it rolling. Let's keep it moving. And she's like, no, I don't. I'm not saying it to you, for you to understand. I like to say things out loud fully so I can understand. I'm like, oh yeah, should I do that too?
Right.
Oh, that's how you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I have all the patience in the world for it, because I understand that's what it is. It's not a reflection of her understanding of my lack of understanding. It's just for her to go through that process, and it is. It's. I think empathy is a good word for it. And there are certain positions that we're in. We talk about the relationships at home, and love. Love allows us to kind of reach outside of ourselves a little bit more, in search of the other person's understanding. Being a coach, loving what you do, being a coach allows you a little bit more patience and understanding to reach on the other side and hear where people are coming from and why they're coming from there. And that is empathy. It's beyond just thinking, they're lashing out, so that's how they talk to themselves. Sure, I know that now, but empathy is feeling that. Well, they do that because of this and this. You know what I mean? Trying to get to the core of things. So empathy is a huge learning tool, when it comes to language.
And I think, listening to you talk, it realize, like, I've done a lot of self-evaluation as far as my ego, my need to be right. So I've done the same thing before. If somebody's telling me something I know, I'm like, I know it. Or I'll try to finish the sentence for them, and I won't let it, get off there, because there's that spot in me that feels compelled to be right. And it may not seem like it, but I do put a lot of effort into understanding that and trying to quiet that in myself. But understanding empathetically too, you know what I mean, I love talking, I love sharing stories, I love sharing knowledge, I love sharing information. Other people like that too. And as much as I like sharing it, I also like receiving it. And even if it's something I think I already know, it's helped me so much. Just find a lot more gratitude and happiness in life by just I've heard the story before. I've seen the technique. I know a better way to do it. It doesn't matter. I just shut off and I just listen and just receive whatever they're saying. I just receive it. I can analyze it later. I can decide if it's right or wrong later, or if it's the best thing for me later. I don't have to do that right now. But just shutting off and just receiving it, man. Understanding that myself, understanding that flaw in myself, and then having a genuine desire to correct it. It's changed the way I have conversations. I get so much more joy out of talking to people, out of listening to people and stuff. And it's huge, just letting people speak how they speak and understanding their language is a representation of their experiences, of their soul, of their selves. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's so important. You're talking about ego, and to take the ego out of the situation and to just be, because the ego has so much to do with the relationship of power, or grasping on to power, or having to be right, or having to be first, or having to be whatever it might be. And I know that that was something we brought up earlier in the conversation about how language is ultimately is a source of power, a sense of power. The dominant language, or the way an orator uses language, that shit is powerful. Martin Luther King, I don't think he certainly wasn't the only person with those ideals, that virtuousness, but he had the ability to express that, to orate that, and that was made it even more powerful, because he was saying a lot of shit that people were thinking, but just didn't have the ability to connect with a larger group in that way. So there's a lot of power there. And just in the world, there are a lot of power struggles. There's a lot of ego struggles. You don't have to look further than politics, red or blue, and the different languages they use, and who stands behind and also utilizes that language. You know what I mean? And we deal with that on a regular basis, and it's difficult because it's over encompassing. Just like I know you're talking about money as the use of language. Like, that's a power move. Money coming up to the table and dropping a whole bunch of money down. That's a power move. Right now, I think we're going through a transitional period where there's a lot of automation that's coming into play, and that cash is not is starting to lose its value. Because if the world is connecting all in one, right? We can't just use the American dollar across seas and places in which they use the yen, or they use the rubles. I don't know if fucking rubles is still a thing or not, but you know what I'm saying.
Somewhere.
It's their, the money that people use is also their language that they use over there, the representation of power. So now we're coming up to a point in which the world is being connected, and we have to decide on a universal based representation of power. And I don't know if that's, and people know, and I do know for sure that people go to war over this sort of thing.
Absolutely.
People go to war over this sort of thing. Certainly not to, I was going to say not to get too deep into it, and then I was going to get deep into it. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you're good. No, you're good, man. I'm listening. I'm on the ride with everybody else right now.
But just as far as going to war, like, I was going to say, that's probably why, but we know for sure that's why. There have been countries that try to build up their own banks and their own institutions, in which is it the fact that they're being self-sustainable or sustaining that affects us? Not necessarily, but you know what it does do? It lessens the value of our currency. So and so how do we get around that? Everybody right now is positioning for stuff like the Bitcoin or electric currency, or that language that is becoming universal.
Whoever has the most wealth has the most power, and wealth is a universal language, and people understand that. And as that power dynamic starts to shift, and people are scampering to be the dominant language, and the most dominant of all languages is money. If you have the most money, you can be the most dominant. And then you want to talk about ego. I mean, the need to be dominant is an inherently egotistical drive, and then once you stop speaking that language and you stop allowing wealth to represent power and be the most dominant language. And now you step back and you look at stuff like that, and it becomes absurd.
Yeah.
Why struggle for that? What does wealth ultimately mean? Does it increase quality of life? You know, and you look around, and a lot of the wealthiest countries have the highest cases of depression, obesity, mental health related illnesses. And no, like obviously being in the wealthiest country doesn't necessarily mean the greatest amount of happiness. You know what I mean? So you start understanding that there's inherent paradoxes in this language. If money is the language of power, you know, having that power doesn't necessarily equate to higher quality of life.
How faulty our value system of one that's built on external representations of power.
Yeah.
You know, money is an external representation of power.
Sure.
Meaning we give it value.
Yeah.
We give it value. So it could be overnight. I mean, the fucking pennies are gone already. But it could be overnight in which the cash means nothing. And now we have to scramble and adapt and reassess, you know, whatever, you know, recreate whatever that external representation of power is. When really this whole time we're talking about language and the use and the connection, communication, these are all internal representations of power. So whatever the value, whatever you're spending on with that internal power. So myself as an artist, I never, nothing to be famous, nothing necessarily to be rich, but I always just wanted to go wherever I go and be me and be able to do exactly what I like to do. You know what I mean? Go to any venue, go to any place, speak in a way, connect in a way. To me, there is power in that.
Sure.
It doesn't take away from anyone else. You know what I mean? And it is self-creating. So to me, that's my interpretation of wealth.
Sure.
And so whatever you're spending money on, okay, sure, I got it. I got it right here. You know, or right here, and however you use it. So I think that's an important realization. External uses of power versus internal uses of power. And I don't know if we're moving too far from the concepts of language, but I think, you know, we're talking about money as language, when really the language is the internal.
Sure.
You know.
Well, and I mean, language is really the truest power that we have. This is how we represent ourselves. It's how we communicate with the outside world. And wherever we put the most value, you know, is what's gonna have power in our lives. You know what I mean? So if you choose the language of external wealth, if you choose the language of money, if you choose the language of ego and power, of domination, if you choose that language, that's what you're always going to seek. You know what I mean? And scientifically, there are studies that don't link external wealth to internal happiness. You know what I mean? So now, for you and I, a lot of what we put in, you know, we can talk all the shit we want. We're both fucking poor. You know what I mean? What do we know from wealth? What do we know from that through experience? You know what I mean? Obviously, this is all anecdotal. This is stuff that we've heard, but you know, we're speaking the same language as somebody else, because somebody else is going to be in our exact situation and say, yeah, like I understand that I can manifest happiness from inside if I choose to speak the language of internal happiness. You know, so we got off on a power trip, I guess. Went way down that avenue, but I think really it cycles back to the exact same thing. How do we choose to internally interpret things? How do we choose to express that through our language, be it body language, be it verbal language, internally, what words do we meditate on? What words do we think of? You know what I mean? What do we visualize in the beginning of the day when we wake up? You know, do we choose to visualize seeking wealth, or do we choose to visualize happiness and understanding and communication and connection? You know what I mean? What language are we choosing? How are we talking? How are we linking to others? And how are we comprehending the world? How are we internalizing the world around us? The world around us, we shape the world around us through our words, right? Or through our thoughts and the feelings, which we shape those into the words, and then the words in turn start to shape the world around us. And now you realize where the power lies, because now, just like you were talking about before, however the world is happening, what happens right now, you don't have to react. Sure, you might still get that feeling,
But now when you're shaping that understanding of the feeling and no longer being a slave to that emotion or reaction, what you put out now is shaping that world for you, in which you get to interpret again. So there's so much power in that interpretation, which is huge, very important.
Absolutely.
And I'm a musician. I crafting songs, so built on language and the use of language. But even before that, I think I wasn't that first. I was just me first, and understanding, what that meant to me and the value it meant to me. And it just kind of expanded from there. So, great topic for today. So,
man. That got pretty heavy, and in embracing those tangents and stuff is always fun, man. But I mean, that's the genuineness of the conversation too. You know what I mean? Thank you guys for going along with that ride with us. Hopefully, we said something that resonates with whoever's listening in some way, shape, or form. I think the most important thing in my language right now is gratitude. So thank you guys all for tuning in, whether it's jumping on live with us or if you guys are checking us on YouTube. Please don't be bashful. Throw us a like if you appreciate what we have to say. If you're feeling generous, give us a share, subscribe to the page. We really appreciate it. So Quince, thank you always, brother.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Top team, appreciate y'all for giving us the space and the platform. You guys, as always, thank you. I think gratitude, right on point with that, and moving into the holiday season, just grateful in general. For that, a little bit of downtime. When I say family time, it doesn't mean we can all necessarily go out and see our family, but either way, stay safe. Certainly stay safe out there. Take care of each other. And happy holidays, man. We'll catch you probably after the new year.
Probably.
Yeah, after the
See
new
what
year.
happens.
Cool. Do you want to say it, or see you next year?
Yeah. See you next year, guys.